Right, hello. After much disaster in getting this all set up, I am live. So this is Rudy at Culloden Painting Studio, and I'm going to work away at the desk here, doing some work on some Prussian landwehr, getting the bases sorted out, and hopefully makes for a good watch for everybody. Of course, the way it started was disastrous. My phone was in my cradle, decided to restart. And then the camera was upside down when I finally restarted it, and you saw my lovely forehead. So looking at the desk now. I have a bunch of Prussian landwehr. I've been gluing them to MDF bases. These are from Warlord Games, 28mm plastics. I've just been doing them as speed paints from Mario Painter, so there's nothing particularly special about them, but I think they look half decent. My basing material of choice is some Vallejo Diorama FX earth texture, and this is dark earth. And I'm applying this with a dentist's tool. This is a wax carver, and it's quite useful because it's got a bit of a curved blade on it, so I can avoid the toes of the models. Now, sorry about the delay. This is my first time ever trying to stream, and I'm doing it through my mobile. And I'm on my laptop off at the side on the control page, but it doesn't seem to be wanting to link the uh, phone footage to the control panel, and I can't see any chat pane or anything like that. So this is an interesting experience for me. And I'm sure that lots of people who are watching this get to contribute to all sorts of other people's streams. Unfortunately, it would seem I don't know what on earth I'm supposed to be doing. So I'm just going to concentrate on putting gunk on bases, and I'll witter away. One downside, I think, about this Vallejo stuff is the setting time. I always find I need to leave it for 24 hours for this gunk to be set hard enough to give it a dry brush, which will be the next step. Probably sometime during the week, or maybe even next weekend, depending on how busy I am. Got some commissions coming up need taken care of, and I'm also going to be painting up some models for a club in Glasgow who are putting on a Leipzig battle. So they've sent me some piano war games, 3D printed Austrians and shakos to paint for that. I think I'll probably make a painting video, and when that's up, I'll link to all the charity page stuff about that event. So if you are out there watching, thanks for tuning in. It says I've got 3 watchers. That's what it says on my mobile screen anyway. As I say, the control panel on my laptop has not picked up that I'm streaming from my mobile, so that's a bit annoying. So a bit more about this project. Earlier this year, I realized that I'd been painting lots of French and French allies for 1813, the Battle of Leipzig. I've been working on 11th Corps under Marshal MacDonald. I picked that corps because it's a bit interesting that there's somebody descended from some Jacobites who fled to France after that whole Culloden fiasco. And I'd been painting so many French, I'd realized that actually I don't have any opponents for them. In my pile of shame was a huge number of Prussians, both some peri-plastic line and these warlord Landwehr, plus the War Games Atlantic reserve infantry. Now, I'm trying not to spend tons and tons on hobbying when I have an absolute lifetime's worth in the pile of shame. So got these Prussians out. I did some researching online as to which Prussian forces actually went up against MacDonald's 11th Corps. And I found out that the 11th Brigade, but there's this weird thing with Prussian division and brigade sizes is that they're not the same as the French. But anyway, it had quite a few Silesian Landwehr battalions. So that's the nice yellow collars and cuffs on these guys. I need to get 4 battalions done. I've got 2, and that's what I'm basing just now. And then we'll have to see if I get the impetus to do another 2. One thing that I have found, unfortunately, doing a Prussian project is that I'm not particularly excited by the uniforms and the painting process. I think, especially when there's a lot of Landwehr and the reserve infantry, it's quite a dull and monotonous looking army. A lot of dark blue, a lot of grey, and not many bells and whistles on the uniforms. I recently bought some of the Perry Spanish, and oh boy, there is a lot of variety that you can get out of those boxes. I did an unboxing video. I've done some conversions already to make some Confederation of the Rhine troops and Swiss from the Spanish sets with a bit of kit bashing, and that's far more interesting. So already I've kind of found another new project, but I owe it to myself to actually get these Prussians painted. So if I can base these, then I've got 2 battalions of Landwehr done, plus 1 battalion of reserve. So that's 3 battalions out of the 12 or so that probably could do. I'll need to make things a bit more interesting somehow. Perhaps some of the commander cavalry can be done. Well, cavalry is something I need to buy. I'm not dead keen to spend any money anytime soon on cavalry models. So Why on earth does it still say that the mobile stream is waiting to begin on my console when it's been going for 10 minutes on my phone? This is maybe one of the problems of being the first ever live stream, is that I've ended up with something that doesn't get linked to the account. Now then, what's next for these Prussians? As I said, I've got some Perry line models. I've got 2 boxes, which is enough for 2 battalions of musketeers. The 3rd battalion in every Prussian regiment was Fusiliers. You can get away with using the musketeers out of the box as is, but there are a couple of differences. The Fusilier officers, for a start, would have a curved saber instead of a straight sword. But conversely, the Fusiliers themselves had a straight blade. The Perrys do a nice metal conversion pack that you can buy, which gives you a couple of command models and the correct packs and sabers for the Fusiliers. So I'll probably need to invest in that. I do have a bunch of command models that I got from Warlord quite a few years ago. They are some mounted Landwehr officers and high command, which includes Blucher. Obviously, he wasn't in command of this particular brigade at Leipzig, but I don't know. There probably were plenty of Prussian generals with moustaches in this period, so he can count as somebody else. Might as well have a look at the officer and the drummer in this battalion here. They are from Warlord. They're not from the box set that these Landwehr come in. They're a separate blister. There is a standard bearer in that blister as well, but I decided not to put him on the bases. The Landwehr and the reserve infantry probably didn't have flags. There might have been some homemade ones, but I decided to go without. In hindsight, that's maybe contributing to the general boredom I'm feeling with this Prussian army. It's not as showy as any of the other nations that I've painted so far. Back in the day, I got these Landwehr on the cheap during one of the sales that Warlord used to do. I think at the time it was a Landwehr sprue of 6 guys for £2.50. So I spent 30 quid and ended up with 72 of them or something like that, which was enough for 3 battalions. And then later on I realized, I need some commands, so I went on and got the blisters with the metal command. One downside of that is that the commanders are in a marching pose, the officer and the drummer there, whereas the Landwehr are standing, so that's not ideal. That's a good knowledge for anybody out there who's wanting to pick up some Warlord Landwehr officers. Though the other set of Landwehr that I'm sticking together at the moment, I've got Calpe officer and drummer on there. So Gripping Beast were very generous and sent me some of their Calpe figures to paint for the channel. And I asked for a couple of Landwehr models as well as line and reserve infantry officers. And they fit really well in with the Warlord plastics. I think that the sizing is just about spot on. And they're much more interesting than the Warlord commands. So that's an option if you want to save a bit of money as opposed to just buying a whole metal battalion from Calpe, which I don't think you'd be disappointed if you can afford that. Oh, right. Refreshed the live stream control panel on YouTube Studio and still no connection to the stream and the chat there. So apologies if you are putting messages into the chat at the moment. I can't read anything. Aha, right. After about a bit of figuring things out and going back to my own YouTube page, I can now see that the one that I scheduled to start at 12:45 is still waiting to start, but it hasn't put two and two together that the stream that I'm actually doing on my mobile that I started about 12:45 is the one that I wanted on my channel. So good news is that I can now see the stream and I can see the chat box. So if you want to say hello, please fire something in, at least to confirm to me that it is working. And I can get some two-way conversation instead of just talking to myself about my Prussian project. I hope everybody who was waiting for that link to go live from the scheduled one isn't still hanging about waiting for that one to begin. I have now deleted that one off YouTube, so hopefully anybody that's waiting around will become aware that it's no longer a thing. And this other one, which I accidentally started, not realizing that I was upsetting the YouTube gods. But this is the actual one where you can come in and watch what I'm up to with this basing material. Hello, Jack Hammond, coming from Italy, doing some French hussars. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully watching me play with some mud is an interesting way to spend the afternoon. And hello, Clive, as well. Thanks for dropping in. Which regiment of French hussars are you doing, Jack? Right, that's about all covered in mud. On to the next base. I do quite like the character that these warlord sculpts have. I love this guy's big bushy beard. No, so Jack says he's got the second, the fifth, and the seventh. So wow, that's a lot of braid to paint. Are you taking the easy route and maybe doing some in Kinski coats with no polices, or is it the full dress hussar look that you're going for? One other face that I really like is the one with glasses. I think that one always looks a bit interesting. With the Landwehr supposed to be the people that weren't physically fit enough to join the main regiments. I think painting lots of sickly looking people, or those perhaps with not so good eyesight or older gentlemen, works really quite well. One thing I would be interested to know from the history nerd point of view is just how many unfit civilians in Prussia in 1813 could afford glasses. I don't know if that's a question that anyone has ever asked before. And if you were a clerk or librarian or something that needed glasses for your day job, would you have tried your utmost to get out of being called up to the Landwehr? There will be an upcoming video on using Army Painter speed paints to paint these Landwehr. I recorded the painting process a couple of weeks ago when I started on these guys. I'll be finishing the video once the basing is all done, so I can get some decent looking pictures for the capsule. Wow, Jack says the second no polices, but full dress for the fifth and seventh. It's dedication. At the same time, though, I kind of feel that when you are doing hussars, you do want to go for the full dress look, even if the chances are, after campaigning in the peninsula or anywhere really, that the fancy stuff would have fallen to pieces. It's maybe one of the reasons why I'm so bored of the Prussians already, is that I can't really look forward to any really nice dress uniforms. None of the fun stuff was in the 11th Corps at Leipzig, that's for sure. Yeah, 10th Regiment of Reserve Infantry is about as exciting as it gets. But the 1st Battalion wore grey, the 2nd blue, and the 3rd very, 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 very dark grey, almost black, according to what I read. But the cut of the reserve uniform is so simple and straightforward that it's not the most interesting or challenging to paint. That is perhaps one major upside of the Prussian army of the sort of 1813 to 1815 period, is that if you are a beginner to Napoleonics and you want something that's straightforward and quite samey to paint with less details on the models, then Prussia probably is a pretty good one to go for. I think the Russian army is also quite easy. Essentially every single line unit is going to have the same uniform, even down to facing colors in the main. I think the excitement of even the variety within a battalion of French between your Fusiliers, Voltigeurs, and Grenadiers makes them a far more interesting painting prospect. We've got Prospero, or Prospero W. Hello from Australia. Nice to have you on board. Whereabouts in Oz are you? My brother and his family live in Melbourne. He is not interested in tabletop gaming in any way, though, so you can't hit him up for a game. The plan, once all this Vallejo earth texture is dry, will be to give it a bit of a dry brush, probably with a light brown or a off-white color, and then get some static grass on it and some tufts. I like having a more grassy appearance to my bases for sort of northwest Europe. I've been doing stuff for the peninsula. I quite like using Geek Gaming Scenic's Mediterranean soil, which is a ready mixed bag of flock, static grass, stones. But one downside I have found to that stuff is that if you get your glue thickness slightly wrong, and there's a bit too much, it does absorb a lot of the moisture from the glue into the flock and sand mixture, and then you have patches which look wet permanently. I've kind of got around that a bit by actually putting some of this earth texture down on the bases, but using the desert sand, which is a very sort of pale yellow, pastel yellow kind of color. And that means I can put on a really thin layer of glue, then the Mediterranean soil, and it ends up sort of complementing the earth texture underneath, and I don't end up with any parts which are looking wet because they've absorbed too much glue. Clive says he's near the end of his Wars of the Roses Lancastrian army, just the command bases to do now, and perhaps a third division to make up to 500 points. Is that Hail Caesar points or bill hooks? And Prospero says, should he change his mind, League of Ancients Melbourne is the place to go. That's funny. Me and my brother back in the 90s went halfers on a box of Warhammer 40,000, well, second edition. And his interest lasted perhaps weeks to months. And here I am 32 years or so later, still playing with toy soldiers, whereas he's much more sensible. I don't think I ever bought him out of his half of the Warhammer box set, so hopefully he's not ever going to tune in to listen to me paint toy soldiers, because then he'll realize that I owe him some money. Clive says Hail Caesar points. So that's quite a lot, because I think what your sort of average Hail Caesar battalion sort of roughly is kind of like the 35 point mark. I can't remember off the top of my head if the new Wars of the Roses supplement changed the points values to any great degree. I wonder how many points my French for Leipzig battalion is. Corps is, with all the battalions I've got in there. I think I've got 16 or 18 foot battalions. One thing it is lacking is cavalry. I got some Italian chasseurs cheval painted a while back, built the Neapolitan ones, including doing a little conversion on the trumpeters' coats. Primed them, painted some horses, and then 8 to 10 months later, I've not finished them off. I have actually had my interest rekindled in the French side of that force with this new Perry Spanish release, of all things. I'd been humming and hawing about doing some of the German forces that were in that corps, mainly because your options were basically metal or using French plastics and just accepting that things were not quite right in terms of number of cross straps or shape of the lapels. But now the Perry Spanish are here. All of a sudden, I can do Baden in Shakos anyway. I'm quite happy that my short coattails don't affect me too much. And then there's Hesse Darmstadt as well. Can do them without too much trouble from the same Spanish kit. Neapolitans I need to do. I have some of the Novocast miniatures metals, and I'm hopeful that they're going to be releasing some more figures, which will work for the light infantry. Again, I could use some French, but just not quite right in terms of things like shackle plates and cuff flaps. So Clive said he is using the Hail Caesar supplement, the new one. 2 divisions of 5. I assume you mean 5 battalia. What do we call them in Wars of the Roses days? 5 lumps of bowmen. And Prosper says, I just got back after a 12-year kid break painting French 18mm AB, and based on your suggestions, some Fizzer Johnson. Oh yeah, great. Yeah, I painted up some of the original Fizzer Johnson casts for photographing for his website when he got going. I think they complement the AB range really well. The AB range is fantastic. I think the huge number of my commissions every year are 18mm. And the great thing about the Fizzer Johnson ones is that they're plugging gaps in the AB range. And I have to say as well, in the AB one, you kind of rely on your painting ability to do things like cuff lace on British, whereas the Fizzer Johnson sculpts have the detail sculpted onto them, so it is easier to pick out with a brush and works pretty well with washes. So I think as far as paintability goes, the Fizzer Johnson models are really good. And Steve Harbour says, wasn't expecting this. Happy Sunday. Yeah, a complete spur of the moment decision to do a live stream, which, Steve, I have messed up. I set a scheduled thing, and then just as 12:45 came to start it, my phone was in the cradle above the desk, and I shifted it up to press the go live button, but in doing so, the pincers that hold the phone on either side squeezed down on the power button, turned the thing off. So had to restart it. And then when I did go live, the camera was facing the wrong way. So at the start of this stream, you can see the ceiling and then my furrowed brow as I go, what on earth's happening here? Oh, that's my face. Turn the camera around. And to top it all off, because I'd started a new stream, I think that YouTube didn't twig that the scheduled stream had started. So I was looking at a blank console which said waiting to connect to the stream. Before I came out, went to my own page on YouTube on the laptop and realized it was a totally different stream. So yeah, I've messed up my first ever stream, but you know, that's how we progress in this world, is you make mistakes and you learn from them. Yeah, Clive said battles is what you call a bunch of men in the Wars of the Roses times. Steve Harbour says, back to painting, 1812 French and a bit Perry's, of course. Yeah, I think that the Perry's will always just kind of be that comfort zone manufacturer 28s for me. Everything just kind of works that they produce and looks good. And I think that the plastic sets, I talked about this in the recent review of the Spanish that I did, they're just so beginner friendly. Having their leaflets in there which explain, you know, what this set is, what's the period, and then a guide to how you can paint a multitude of regiments. They've done all that research and presented it for everybody coming in. And the models are very nicely sculpted as well and great value. So yeah, they're doing a lot for keeping the hobby accessible. I guess you're talking about the Fizzer models there, Prospero. More options, more choices. Patches on the pants are a nice touch. Yeah, getting a sort of rough and ready on campaign look without having to sculpt on or paint on detail is a great thing about the Fizzer Johnson 18mm sculpts. Looking at these models here, you'll see that there's already some static grass and some different coloured gunk on these bases. I first painted these Landwehr, I think, about 5 years ago. There's even a painting guide on the YouTube channel. And I individually based them, thinking that they'd be more sort of sharp practicey. But I decided that sort of sharp practice for me is really just going to stick to the peninsular. So I'm rebasing these guys on multi-bases. So I pried them off their 20mm rounds yesterday and sticking them down on these 60 by 40s. Yeah, I might end up having just to bin this bit of static grass. It's got a bit gumped. But then again, it might look okay that's trodden in there. Jack Hammond says, I agree, Perry's are go-to. Piano war games are also amazingly detailed models that mix up well with Perry's. Yeah, so I've painted a few Piano war games figures. I've not bought any yet myself. I have worked on both 3D prints and metal castings. And the metal castings are pretty good. I think it's clear that they were designed for 3D printing, and some parts of the casting process don't hold up too well in the metal. Sort of the undercuts and things end up filled with big blobs of metal in some places. But the proportions are magnificent, and they really look anatomically correct, and the detail that you can get from computer modeling is almost unparalleled. I will be doing some of their Austrians soon, both a line battalion in Shaco and an artillery piece, or is it a battery? It might be a couple of pieces actually, for the Glasgow based charity that raises money for veterans. They're putting on a Leipzig battle in the summer, which unfortunately I can't go to because it is clashing with a couple of family birthdays, and I can't just book a weekend away for myself and abandon family in July like that. So that's a shame. Some people were saying that the piano war games, there's some Hessen Darmstadt in Spain, which I have painted, and they come with the shakos. And they were kind of the go-to for a lot of these Confederation of the Rhine units until the Perry Spanish arrived with the option to do it all in plastic. The Perrys, of course, do a metal range of Confederation of the Rhine figures, and there are some that can't be done with that Spanish kit. There's a few, names escape me right now. Lipodetmold, tiny German states, who remembers? But anyway, they've got single-breasted jackets, so one row of buttons down the center. Nassau is another example of single row buttons on the jackets. I don't think we're ever going to see anything in plastic for these very minor nations whose contributions tended to be a couple of battalions. But you never know. Perry's might just do everything and run out of options and then give us these very rare examples of uniforms. Did have somebody post on my Spanish review video the other day of would the Perry Spanish work for the South American Wars of Liberation? And my short answer was I don't know. I don't know very much about that period at all. I did some quick Googling, and what I could see from the images was a lot of single row buttons on their jackets. One thing, though, that I think that Spanish and French Napoleonic figures work quite well for is actually Mexican forces during the Texan Revolution, so the Alamo and things like that. There are, of course, manufacturers out there doing proper models in metal, but if you're wanting to save some pennies, then plastic French or Spanish is probably quite a useful thing to have. Clive says Lucas at Piano War Games uses the revenue raises through Kickstarter to fund the mold making for metal figures. I use this Hesse Spanish as the basis of my Duchy of Berg conversions. Yeah. The Duchy of Berg uniforms, I think you can do quite well with a combination of French and Confederation of the Rhine. It's that whole two cross belts thing that just makes it slightly tricky, as opposed to just running some post 1812 Bardan French. And Steve says, I wish there was a UK stockist for piano minis. Yeah, I wonder how realistic it is to expect something to come from there. I imagine the company is going to go from strength to strength. Whether Lucas's focus is going to be on metal going forward, I'm not sure. I think certainly the tide is beginning to turn on the hobby, and 3D printing is going to become more ubiquitous. I've thought about it, but I just don't have room in the house at the moment to have a resin printer. I don't particularly want to be huffing the fumes, and I certainly don't want my family and my dog to be either. And I don't have a suitable shed or garage. Let's have a look at this base. This is a Calpe NCO. So I think this is from a firing line set. So he's standing, which fits in perfectly with the Warlord standing plastics. The Calpe models are absolutely beautiful. And I think I can safely say that they are the best Napoleonic Prussians for 1813 to 15. I know the Perrys do a fantastic range, but I really like the way the Calpe ones are sculpted. They paint up so easily. There's just a bit of chunk to them. It's not unrealistic. You know, I think heads and hands are pretty fairly sized. They're a bit on the heroic scale in comparison to the Perrys. But the cross straps, especially, they're just raised enough that when you put a wash on, it defines things just superbly. So, thumbs up for Calpe. I'm kind of embarrassed that it has taken this long for me to actually paint some of their figures, and that was only through the goodness of the folk at Gripping Beast who agreed to send me some to paint for the channel. Here's a question. If I were to do any more live streams, is there anything that you would want to see me focus on? Would it be live painting or wittering about the hobby as is kind of going on right now? I'll take any suggestions. This is the first time doing it, and it was a spur of the moment decision because the house was quiet with everybody else going out, and I thought, you know what, let's just give it a go. But if I'd been planning it, it would have been a lot more organized. Jack says, live painting with your own experience, just like now. Okay. One thing I might need to inquire of is with some of my commission clients if they'd be happy for me to paint their models on the live stream. Most painting I do is other people's figures. That's why it takes me months, if not years, to complete any projects of my own. There's this horrible thing when you're doing commissions is that you feel that if you are painting, you should be painting somebody else's stuff to earn some pennies. It almost feels a bit guilty to paint my own stuff half the time. Steve says, just do whatever motivates you. Oh, thanks. Yeah. I suppose that is one upside of just working on what you feel like is that you don't depress yourself by thinking I need to go on and satisfy somebody else. And yeah, I don't want to become one of those stars who on YouTube who will do anything for money. Yeah, I'll become a star. Doubt it. Can't even set up a live stream properly. I have been thinking about doing a talk on sort of the pros and cons of being a commissioned painter. One of these sort of expose the secrets and bare all. But I don't know if it necessarily would appeal to the broader audience who are here really for painting guides. Okay, that's another base done. Yeah, so these are a bunch that I did. Well, apart from this guy here who's speed paints, these are ones that I painted up. Oh, yeah, 5 years ago, maybe. And 4 or 5 years. They were all done, I think, with Vallejo paints. One thing that I have heard is that the average Landwehr jacket greatcoat was not of great quality, and the colours would fade or darken, and having a bit of a mismatch in colours within a battalion is a-okay. Hello there, Benjamin. Thanks for joining me on a very spontaneous first ever live stream. You missed the embarrassing start where I managed to turn my phone off as I was making it go live, and it took me a while to realize I was now doing a separate stream to the one that was up on my console, and therefore about 15 minutes, 20 minutes expired before I realized I could see anybody in the chat. So I am basing up some Napoleonic Prussians. I've got some Vallejo earth texture, which I'm trying to avoid getting on their toes. That is that interesting thing though about when you're painting models, is that realistically anybody who's been trudging through the mud on the battlefield is going to have it all up their legs. But I think this stuff, especially, despite the fineness of the sand in there, if you get it all over a model, it doesn't look great. And you have to draw that line between realism and actually having something that looks nice. Some of the most talented painters out there are the ones that can really convey a sense of grubbiness without sort of ruining the paint job. Blood and gore, that's another question that I always think about when I'm painting up models. You know, how much do you want to actually portray your figures as being in the thick of battle? A little bit of red perhaps on the sword of a Roman is okay, but having a Napoleonic battalion whose faces are all blackened with burnt powder and jackets splashed with somebody else's claret. Yeah, I don't know if that's the look I ever want to give figures. Here's a general question for anybody that's a viewer of the videos on the channel, and you've watched the recent review of the Perry Plastic Spanish. Did you notice any differences in the, I don't know, professionalism of the presentation? The reason I ask is that I spent a lot more time on the editing process, putting in some transitions, fading in and out. And I also spent a lot longer on the image editing for the thumbnail. So all anecdotal, I guess, from you guys, but did you notice the differences? Does it help engage you if things have a higher production value, or do you not care about that and you're here to work out what color buttons people these figures should have, and you just want the painting tips? Steve says he always has casualties in his Napoleonic units. Now, I do actually need to make some casualty counters. I have a lot of dead French and British, I think, from the Perry, is it the heavy cavalry set, cuirassiers? So I could paint them up. And I got a couple from Gripping Beast from Calpe for the Prussians. I've done a better job of avoiding getting the earth texture on the static grass that came already stuck to feet on these. Benjamin says, my units always become casualties. Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't game very regularly at all, not out of choice, but just out of the grim reality of life. And it may be because I play so few games that I never get to practice and learn how to be a competent general. But I can pretty much guarantee every opponent a win if I take part in a game. I think last year I managed a whole one more game. We played some bolt action around about D-Day last year. Pretty certain I lost that one. But yeah, I do have a couple of friends who are tangentially interested in the Second World War, and I got a bit of interest in learning bolt action. They're more board gamers. But then V3 came out, and we realized that we would have to spend time learning a new rule set, and we've not got around to organizing a new game for V3 yet. And that's almost been, what was it, September last year the new rules came out? What's Jack said? He said Spanish box set review was a great vid. What's most important is that you're happy with the outcome. I enjoyed it. Clive said, I've started to use drum lines as casualty bases instead of including drummers in units. 3 times drummers in a circular base and place them behind the rear line. Now that's interesting. Thanks, Jack, for letting me know you watched the Spanish video. I think that, you know, I do feel that the extra effort has made it a lot more presentable, and I suppose that is pleasing to me. But it's just always that balance of time and effort. More time I spend editing videos or thumbnail images is less time painting models and recording stuff. But Clive, I'm interested about having drummers as casualty bases. I think that, you know, the Tête de Colonne is a really interesting but sort of underrepresented part of any Napoleonic force. And they do look good when you've got massed ranks of musicians. But do you want to put in lots of effort painting something that's going to just be there in the background? Steve says, just keep playing V2. Ah, so Bolt Action 2nd edition. Yeah, I mean, that's always an option. Though, because I game so irregularly, I think probably in my life I only ever had like 5 games of Bolt Action V2. There are some gaming clubs up here in the Highlands and Inverness and Dingwall and beyond. But the nights that they run their sessions just always seem to clash with other stuff that I've got on. And hopefully, as my children get older, they'll actually show an interest in playing toy soldiers, and I can do that with them. But no such luck yet. 12 eggs a day. Hello, says your washes comparisons videos help me so much. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. I have probably a bit of an unhealthy addiction to buying and testing paints. I've got many bottles that have maybe only ever been used once, and it was my pleasure to sort of demonstrate the difference in washes. Because I was genuinely interested myself. Doing commissions means that sort of speed is key, and finding out which wash had the best sort of overall effects straight out of the bottle helps in that regard when I'm doing sort of the tabletop quality standard detail finish commissions. It's a wash and a dry brush, and off they go to the client. And a lot of people had talked about the formulation changes in Games Workshop washes over the years. And the Army Painter, although they said that there was no formula change for their washes, I wasn't seeing that when I was using the bottles. So I managed to get enough of the old and the new ranges together and do a comparison. And it may well be that the older ones, just because they've been sitting for a long time, they'd evaporate a bit, or some of them had become stuck. Some of the pigment had been stuck to the bottle. But there definitely were differences, and I think it's important for people to be able to see that before they spend their own money on washes. So you're very welcome to the wash comparison videos. Glad they were helpful. It looks the dog's Watsits though. Is that about your bases of drummers? Yeah, I think that could look quite spectacular. Benjamin says, you have to begin their indoctrination at a young age. Well, I have carefully laid books full of shiny pictures of shiny models around. I even gave them some old, like 20-year-old Space Marine models to slap some paint on a couple of years ago, hoping that would make them excited about the prospect of playing toy soldiers with their dad. But no, it's football and Nintendo are their main interests. Oh, we've been going over an hour now. Well, that's impressive. This is my last base of Prussians. So I may start wrapping this up. But if you've got any questions about the hobby in general, or advice for things you're painting, or any off-topic, I can't promise I'll answer off-topic questions, but please use this time to interrogate me about anything. 12 eggs a day. What type of basing mud is that? I'm very new to mini painting. Yeah, no problem. So this is Vallejo Diorama FX Earth Texture. This is dark earth. You get other ones, which I've just got out of reach. Just 2 seconds. I've got a very squeaky chair. So another one they do is desert sand. And there's also brown earth. There probably are others, but these are the three that I stick to. It's 200 mils. I'm trying to think how much this costs. About £12. Games Workshop do similar in their little pots, but you're spending £5 on like 20 mil. So from an economic point of view, the Vallejo stuff is far better. I mean, you can make this stuff up on your own with a mix of sand and paint and PVA, white glue, Elmer's glue if you're in the States. I think that's what it's called there. But I like the consistency. If I'm buying this stuff, I know what's the end result's going to look like, and I don't have to spend time mixing it and getting the proportions just correct. So it's very useful stuff. One other thing I was talking about earlier is there's a company called Geek Gaming Scenics do what they call their ready-made instant basing, which is a bag full of a mix of sand and stones and flock grass, and you just glue that to the base. It's also very good stuff. Benjamin says, you place tufts on them before you add the mud? Well, not really. What's going on here is that 6 of these figures had been individually based before on 20 mil rounds, and I tore them off to rebase them in multi-bases. And some of the tufts were loose, and I just thought I'll hold on to them, not waste them. So they've just got glued down before this is going on. It's not my usual approach at all. And one of them, in fact, I already threw in the bin because I got too much of this goop on it. All right, that's the last one done. 12 Eggs Today says, thank you so much. That will help my project very much. You're welcome. Happy to give tips and advice. That's the main point of starting this channel back in the pandemic, was I just wanted to help other people who might be doing hobbying during that big old lockdown period where we had lots of time at home with nothing else to do. Clive says, I saw a video recently when someone made his own using cheap craft paint and dried coffee grounds. Yeah, I could see how that could work. I think that the level of genius for DIYing things out there in the hobby is kind of unparalleled. People will find all sorts of uses for weird stuff. When I used to do a lot more sci-fi gaming, I would be making terrain out of old drinks cans and any old bit of weird polystyrene packaging. Anything to save money. Steve says, French drummers, anyone knew a good resource for regiment jacket colours in 1812? Ooh, 1812, I'm not sure about. You have that sort of weird overlap between pre-Bardan and, well, post-Bardan, or just Bardan uniforms. I think anyone that's in the Bardan uniform would be a green jacket with the red-yellow type lace on it. Before then, it is really up to the colonel as to what the uniforms would be. If we're talking line regiments, that is. Light infantry after 1812 would be blue with white lace. But in 1812, for marching off to Russia, I don't even know which regiments would be in the Bardan uniforms or not. So it's not for me to answer anyway. Prospero says, what is a good color combination for peninsular bases paint colors? Well, as I was saying earlier, now, do I have some peninsular models nearby? Yes, I do. I'll grab some British, which are visually based. So this one has Geek Gaming Scenics Mediterranean soil pre-mix basing material, just simply glued on there. I also recently did some Swiss for the peninsula. And these ones have the same Geek Gaming Scenics base mix, but added tufts. And first of all, I did a layer of the desert yellow, desert sand, yellowish Vallejo earth texture. There's a couple of reasons I did that. One was to sort of even out the base to the puddle base on the figure, because there's always that sort of mound, which I didn't like. And the other thing as well is that where there's a bit too much glue, it sort of looks like it's a bit wet, where it's soaked into the sand and the flock. Didn't like that finish. But after adding the desert sand, it evens out the level of everybody's base, and it means a thinner layer of glue can go on, so there's none of the sort of wet looking patches. Right, okie dokie. It says I've been streaming for an hour and 11 minutes. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I've quite enjoyed this, even if I made an absolute pig's ear of it at the start of the process. I hope that it's been an enjoyable way to spend a Sunday, just chilling out and watching me spread muck on bases. Thanks for contributing in the chat. It was nice to know that people are watching and doing some hobby at the same time as me. Prospero's last message there says, excellent, I'm literally painting Swiss as I watch you. Ah, well, yeah, there is that video with the Swiss, if you want some guides. This was the 3rd Regiment, and I stuck all these guys together many months ago. And one thing about the 3rd Regiment of Swiss is that probably some of the Fusiliers and Voltigeurs had side plumes, but that wasn't an option in plastic, so I just used the Victrix. But of course now the Perry Spanish head sprue comes with shakers with side plumes, so that would be use for the 3rd Regiment than the Victrix kit. And also the Grenadier heads, the shackle plate is probably wrong for the 3rd Regiment. It wasn't a grenade, it was an eagle, but I don't mind. It wasn't available in plastic. I don't even know if it's available in metal, so I decided not to go for that. Anyhow, yeah, call a halt to this one. Thanks very much for joining in the chat, everybody. I don't know if this is going to be a regular thing. Having a quiet house to do this doesn't happen often, but I will try not to make such a mess of setting a schedule for a live stream as I did earlier today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for letting me know that you like some of the stuff that I'm doing, and I'll speak to you all again soon. Bye for now.